Yo, what is up guys? It's Chillfeed here, and this time around I wanted to do something a little bit different, and as you can see with the title of the video, I'm going to give you my opinion on if it's worth buying Borderlands 3 in 2020 alongside the upcoming Steam release in just 2 days. So far, I've logged in almost 400 hours into the game and put even more time into Borderlands 2, and I also played the original Borderlands and the pre-sequel. So if you don't know whether you can trust the opinion of a stranger like me, maybe this will help you out a little bit with that. Anyway, if anyone is here watching who already bought the game on the Epic Games launcher on PC or maybe even on console and is still unsure about whether it's worth buying the game again when it launches on Steam in a few days, the answer you will get here from me is a strong no. Unless you want to get rid of the Epic Games launcher entirely, or you want to make the switch to PC in general, or just to complete your Steam library with the latest Borderlands game, there's not going to be anything new when the game launches on Steam that hasn't been there before, and there will even be crossplay between Epic and Steam, so I see no reason at all to buy it again. But is the game good enough to pay about 30 euros nowadays, or maybe even the 40 or 50 euros for the deluxe and super deluxe editions? The answer I'm going to give you to that is a strong yes. Without a doubt, at least for the standard version, and let me try to explain why I think so first, and later I talk about the deluxe editions. And since the game is already out for half a year, there has been so much said and talked about it already that I don't want to give you the classic type of review, and instead I want to focus on telling you how Gearbox, the developers of the game in case you didn't know, has been handling changes to the game with updates, hotfixes and complaints from the player base so far, what's in store for you in the upcoming months in terms of new content, big DLCs, and ultimately the most important thing, is the game still fun to play after your first or maybe even second playthrough? Not just in my opinion, but judging by the characters, skill trees, gameplay and content and so on. Let's start talking briefly about the story of the game, and although I don't want to focus on the topic, I have to mention that the story of the game is not something that will keep you playing in my opinion. The story itself is decent at best, there's nothing too unique about it, and it's ultimately a pretty generic "you're on the good side, now go kill the baddie" story. But the worst part about this story, and I already made a video about that, are in my opinion the main characters and the writing within it. I think one of the biggest reasons why Borderlands 2 made so many players fall in love with the franchise and kept them playing were not just the innovative playable characters and builds, the bazillion guns to choose from, or the unique art and graphic style, which are things Borderlands 3 also has, but also the interesting characters and funny dialogue between them in the previous games. Borderlands 3 just, in my opinion, lost a lot of that humor and introduced only a few decent new characters where a lot of them are just kinda generic and some of them are straight up annoying or even cringy at times. While some of the old beloved characters are nowhere to be found yet, some of them are locked behind a paywall for future DLCs, and the ones that are present are somewhat mistreated or pushed aside for the new characters. It also doesn't help that the villains are sometimes annoying at best, especially compared to Handsome Jack from Borderlands 2. Long story short, if you are a fan of any of the previous titles or just want to enjoy a good story in this looter shooter, I think you will be disappointed by this game if you choose to buy it. However, if you do enjoy single player PvE shooters with a ton of loot to collect just like the previous games, there will be 4 unique playable characters with 3 different skill trees to choose from. The movement feels great, the gunplay is tight and responsive, the weapons are of course unique and interesting, at least the vast majority of them. The graphics are really good and can look amazing sometimes. The areas all look unique and different, there's tons of side missions which in my opinion are sometimes even better than the main story missions. There are even a few endgame areas you can unlock after the story ends. Making friends and trading items is as easy as it's ever been, and the game is just a blast to play in co-op, and everything else you could want from a modern first person shooter type game can be found here. Again, long story short, what the game lacks in terms of story and characters, it makes that up in terms of a pure gameplay experience. But why do I think the game won't last as long as Borderlands 2 did, when everything besides the characters and story seemed to be improved upon in Borderlands 3? Well, let's get to a few of the issues I have with the game going forward and from what we have seen so far in terms of DLC. Overall, and especially for today's standard in the gaming industry, Gearbox has been doing a great job of releasing free content post-release. So far, the only paid DLC we got was the first campaign DLC that came out back in December the 19th, and we have the second one coming out in about 2 weeks from now on the 26th of March. Everything else was content that everyone had access to, no paywalls and no microtransactions. But now 6 months in, what exactly is all that we got for free as additional content? The first added free content came at the end of October as a Halloween special and as a part of an anniversary event during the entire month. The Halloween special was called the Bloody Harvest event, just like the one we had in Borderlands 2. Unlike the one in Borderlands 2 though, this time around we had to kill a certain number of flying ghosts to get access to a new area, and in that new area you made your way to a quote-unquote new boss that you could kill for a chance to get one of 4 new legendary items to drop for you. Oh, and it also introduced the terror effect, which some people loved, some people hated, but if you choose to buy Borderlands 3, you will have the chance to experience this yourself around this year's Halloween where the event will be back. Moving on from there, we've got the Maliwan takedown, so far the only raid-like activity we have in the game, that introduced a new linear area, a bunch of new legendary weapons alongside a new difficulty setting called Mayhem Mode 4, which is essentially just a harder version of what we already had in the game in Mayhem Mode 3. And with all that, it was the first real challenging activity in the game and has been ever since its release back in November. After that, the last tiny mini event was going on just recently in February on Valentine's Day and was called the Broken Hearts Day event, and I'm not gonna lie, this was basically just a recycled version of the Bloody Harvest event, except there was no new area to explore, a few less items to get, and in the end it was just underwhelming in my opinion. Instead of ghosts, you had to shoot 100 hearts in total for a few cosmetics and 2 new weapons, of which one of them is probably still the best one-shot sniper rifle we have to date. But besides the new sniper, the best thing about this event was the first level cap increase from level 50 to level 53, so you had 3 more skill points to spend and 15 minutes of playing time to get there if you were just farming for XP. Most people would argue that 3 levels was not enough, and I'm still kinda on the fence about that because at this point in the game we've had enough time to figure out the meta builds and collect the right gear for it, so if they would have increased the level cap even further, the game would just get ridiculously easy. On the other hand, it's absolutely annoying to refarm all your gear for just 3 levels, since there's no feature that lets us simply upgrade our gear to our current level, so if you buy the game, be prepared for another level cap increase eventually where you most likely have to refarm all of your loot again. And now I don't want this to turn into another comparison video between the two games, but to put it into perspective, up until this point in the life cycle of Borderlands 2, we already had 3 major campaign DLCs, a new Slaughter Circle arena, a level cap increase from 50 to 61 would have been released in a few days from now alongside a new weapon rarity, and the second playable character was introduced on March the 24th. And speaking of new playable characters, it looks like we won't be getting anyone this time around in Borderlands 3, since according to creative director Paul Sage, who said the data from previous games showed that Borderlands players don't play with DLC characters that much and will just switch back to the main eventually anyway. However, they did mention that they might instead focus on expanding the existing playable characters, for example maybe by giving them something like a new skill tree or whatever, so I think we can all expect something in terms of character variety. None of this has been confirmed though, and nothing has been announced so far, but I think it would be a mistake to not introduce a new playable character somewhere down the line. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. So, what about the longevity of the game? Well, as I already mentioned before, right now I don't think the game will last as long as Borderlands 2 did in terms of a healthy player base after like 5 to 7 years even, but I still think it will last long enough to be worth your money for today's video game standards. If you consider the playing time you will have for just the main story alone, you will find yourself at around 20 hours of gameplay for one character. double that time if you complete all these side quests, and maybe even triple that time if you complete everything you can do in the game and collect every single legendary and unique item for just one character alone. The good thing is that all 4 of these characters are vastly different from each other and offer unique playstyles, so you could play the game right away again after your first playthrough and have a completely different experience. Of course, like I said, and you've probably heard that multiple times before, the story is not the best, so I think that will have a big impact when it comes to longevity, but at least you can now skip the whole thing and just focus on the good gameplay after maybe your first or second playthrough. One of 2 things that I think will help the game last longer than other games and can make you want to pick it up in a few years again is the graphic and art style that will probably age well again, just like Borderlands 2, so it won't feel outdated too early. The other thing, and this might be a controversial one, is the anointment system that, even though it can feel a bit frustrating sometimes, will sometimes force you to farm for gear longer, and for some that might be a good thing, and for others it might be a bad thing. The anointment system is basically another layer of RNG on a weapon, since the weapon can drop from regular enemies or bosses with or without it. And anointments are basically a special ability that you can get while using the weapon. For instance, you can get plus 50% bonus damage for that weapon for a short time every time your action skill ends. And while this is considered one of the better anointments, I mean it's 50% more damage and sometimes you can get even up to 125% more damage depending on the anointment. There are some anointments that are straight up useless, like your accuracy and handling gets better while sliding or something. And the legendary loot is dropping like crazy on higher mayhem modes compared to previous titles. So most of the time, instead of farming for the legendaries to drop, you will farm for the best possible anointment on that weapon. So for those of you that like to min-max their gear in games, there's plenty for you to work with here, but for some of you who enjoy the game more casually or simply don't have the time to farm for perfect gear, you might feel a little underpowered on harder difficulties or in the raids if you go in solo, but luckily there's also a matchmaking system for an easier time for everyone, so I don't think there's much to worry about here. One thing that Gearbox has been killing it with lately are hotfixes for the game, releasing a bunch of weapon buffs over the past couple of weeks, and to be honest, they have been doing a good job overall with fixing some of the complaints the community had since the game released. Even though it might take them a while sometimes, I really appreciate that they obviously listen to the community. There has been, I believe, 17 hotfixes in total, while some of them included bigger fixes and some of them smaller, but almost all of them were much needed improvements. For example, the community was complaining that there were not enough ammo stations to refill your ammo on certain maps, and Gearbox eventually fixed that. There have been several changes and tweaks to the gun system, buffing a lot of the weapons that desperately needed it, and also nerfed a few of them to a point where they are, let's just say, not that viable anymore. But overall, there were so many changes and improvements to the game since release that it would take hours to go over all of them, and I think people don't give them as much credit for that as they deserve. Something that Gearbox has not been able to fix is the performance of the game on PC, at least for me and a few of my friends. And while I don't have a monster PC, I still have one that should be good enough to not get frame drops to 30 or 40 FPS sometimes, but that might be something that will be fixed in the future, and it's far from being game breaking for me at least. Still, it's a little bit annoying and it's worth mentioning. Obviously, nobody can tell what Gearbox will change in the future in terms of their release schedule or free and paid DLC. The only thing we do know is what we will get over the next 2 months from a roadmap that was released recently. Like I already mentioned, the second major DLC campaign will release in just about 2 weeks from now, on the 26th of March, and judging by their last DLC, Moxie's Heist of the Handsome Jackpot, there will be a new and interesting area, a few new enemy types and bosses, a storyline with new and returning characters like Gage for instance, a bunch of new loot including legendary weapons, and all that for just 15 euros if you don't pay for a season pass that I will talk about later in the video. After the second DLC, there will be a bunch of free added content again, starting with the overhauling of the Mayhem mode called Mayhem 2.0, and as much as I personally hope this is not the case, it sounds just like the overpowered level system from Borderlands 2. With Mayhem 2.0, Gearbox will apparently change the current Mayhem system, and for those of you who aren't familiar with that system, it basically makes your enemies harder to kill, and in return you have a higher chance at rare loot. But because Gearbox wouldn't want to call it Mayhem mode for no reason, they added a bunch of modifiers that were so bad sometimes that they will change the way they work in the upcoming update, while also adding 10 more Mayhem levels, and I believe every item you get will scale to the level of Mayhem you had active when the item dropped. This just sounds to me like we simply have to refarm all of our good stuff again on the highest possible Mayhem level, and I don't know about you, but I never really understood the concept behind this. If all you do is hit harder and might be able to sustain more damage, while your enemies will also hit harder and sustain more damage. And all of this without earning extra skill points seems just pointless to me. Get it? Like, no skill points, pointless, and anyway. I guess we'll have to wait and see until we have more info on that. Shortly after Mayhem 2.0 is rolling around, we'll get another seasonal event called Revenge of the Cartels, but there's not too much known about this that I can tell you right now. And then in May we will get our second raid with the Guardian takedown, where we can expect a new raid boss, of course, new loot, and a much needed new challenging activity, so it would really seem like the perfect time for you to pick up the game again, or for the first time now to get ready for all the new content that's coming soon. We even know that the third DLC will be coming this summer, and it's called Outlaws and Dinosaurs, and there will be a fourth DLC at some point this year as well that we basically don't know anything about but speculations, and that it might feature Creek, who was a playable psycho character in Borderlands 2. So to sum it all up, and before we get into which of the 3 available versions you should buy, if you choose to buy the game of course, Borderlands 3 is a game with a lot of content, a lot of loot to collect, a lot of build variety with 4 characters with multiple action skills each, great overall gameplay in my opinion, a developer that cares to fix issues with the game, 3 more DLCs to come with more loot and levels added in the future, and much more. But on the other hand, it also has a disappointing story with a lot of bad character choices, no new playable characters in sight, and a lot of RNG involved for your gear, which I guess is bad only for those who just want the best possible gear and don't like spending too much time farming for it. If we now take all that into consideration and the fact that you can get the standard version of the game for now under $30, I would tell you that the offer is almost too good to pass up on, regardless of whether you were a fan of previous games or not. As long as you like looting and shooting in video games of course, and don't mind the fact that there's no PvP. With that being said, let's take a look at the 3 different versions you can get of the game right now. There's obviously the standard version with a few cosmetics as a pre-order bonus if you are buying the game on Steam for just €30. Then you have the deluxe edition for €40, which I would say don't even bother buying this, since you will just get a few cosmetics and 2 legendary toy guns that are not worth using at almost any point in the entire game. And then there's the super deluxe edition for €40 that includes some more cosmetics and the 4 story DLCs with the season pass. And I'm not telling you this is a must buy, but if you can get the base game plus €60 worth of DLC content and a bunch of cosmetics on top for just €50 in total, that's almost an offer you can't refuse. The DLCs in my opinion have almost always been really good, and I might have even enjoyed Borderlands 3's only DLC so far more so than I did the main story. Not to mention that there's also a ton of new loot to collect with every DLC. Now obviously this is just a suggestion, and if you are not sure if you're going to enjoy the game in the long term anyway, then you should obviously not buy the season pass at first and wait for another sale later maybe. Still, if you consider buying the game, consider buying the season pass now. It's a great offer in my opinion. So that was my review of Borderlands 3 in 2020. My first review in general, so feel free to let me know down in the comment section what you liked and disliked about it. I would appreciate some feedback on this, and obviously you could also leave a like if you did enjoy this, and if you do have more questions about the game, feel free to ask me in the comments as well, or maybe even join my Discord server and join the Chill Gang. We have a bunch of awesome people there already, and we help each other out by sharing save files if you're on PC, trade weapons on every platform, and maybe you can find some friends to play the game with. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing for more Borderlands 3 content in the future, and with that being said, I see you in my next video.